Hey everyone, and welcome to part 2 of my Warcraft Story series. The response to the first part of this series was very positive, and I am truly glad with that. I'm putting a lot of effort into it to make sure that it's a respectable presentation because I like the story, and I think everyone will enjoy a game a great deal more if they understand it. So tell all of your friends about this series. I want everyone to know just how great of a background their favorite game has. It's up to you to spread the word. And of course, enjoy. So, we left off in our interpretation of the story with the Dark Titan Sargeras integrating new and powerful allies into his Burning Legion. As Archimonde led the Legion into combat against any and all life that did not submit to the might of the Legion, Kil'jaeden worked to bolster their numbers. In his efforts, Kil'jaeden quested deep into the Nether, where Sargeras had since banished many of his past enemies. Within, he rediscovered the Nathrezim, whom were the most significant contributors to the Legion's foundation. Sargeras had not forgotten that their logic was a great influence upon him, and recognized that they, and their power over undeath, would serve the Legion very well in their conquest. So he appointed them to be the Legion's strategists. The Nathrezim would become propaganda artists that prove their skills in manipulation can be just as effective in the destruction of worlds as Archimonde's devastating wake of terror. Sargeras personally appointed the Nathrezim to carry out a very integral role in the Burning Legion, and they would be his masterminds in actions as well as carrying out the Legion's tactics by serving as its agents. Tichondrius would be their leader, as he was previously the Lord of the Nathrezim. The Burning Legion was growing very quickly, and as it consumed worlds and eradicated life at the will of the Dark Titan, many servants enlisted into its cause. Eventually, Kil'jaeden would encounter the mighty Annihilan race that were said to be born from pure hate within the twisting Nether. The Annihilan were enormous reptilian creatures that resembled massive winged lizards. They are vessels of pure destruction, and have no equal on the battlefield when it comes to brute strength and resilience. They live to destroy and terrorize life. Archimonde greatly admired the brutal nature and tenacity of the Annihilan, and personally appointed them the generals in his army. They would lead the forces of the Legion where he was not present, and all who knew of them would fear them more than any other race. They would later be named the Pit Lords, as every one of them is an officer in the Burning Legion and oversees the actions of lesser, more dispensable ground forces. Archimonde would appoint the legendary Manoroth as his second in command, making him the newest lieutenant to the Legion, fourth in command from Sargeras himself. Together, they recruited more and more fearsome beings into their growing legion that scorched across the universe. Nothing stood in their way as they extinguished virtually everything that lived. Yet they had not encountered the Pantheon. Meanwhile, back on Azeroth, life began to flourish. The Titans had been gone for some time now, and in their stead, the dragon aspects watched over the world. When Eonar blessed the planet with her gift of life, one might say that she overcompensated in the beginning. Perhaps she did so intentionally, or perhaps the development of the first sentient beings on Azeroth were born by chance. I like to think they were born out of necessity to protect the planet in its times of darkness. We can also theorize that one or more celestial beings of great power visited Azeroth during this time. They could be the Naaru, or perhaps godlike beings of a separate origin. The one we know for certain is the goddess Elune, whom has never been sighted by any mortals alive to tell the tale. Her specifics are currently unknown, but she is said to wield a very great power. She herself could even be a Titan, or perhaps even Eonar herself, watching over the planet as it grows from infancy. It was during this time that the ancient protectors were birthed into the world. They were neither mortals, nor were they gods. They were in between, so to speak. They walked the line of mortality, living forever with fantastic powers, yet they are not invincible. They can be wounded, and even slain, yet compared to mere mortals, they would be exponentially more wise and powerful. They are not, however, to be confused with the dragon aspects. They have not been, to our knowledge, empowered by the Titans in any way. They are born of Azeroth, and are the progenitors to all the animals that live in our midst today. The first bears on Azeroth were twin brothers, Yursok and Yursal. They were tremendous in size and furious adversaries. Their ferocity in combat was unmatched by any other animal. Tortola, the first and greatest of the turtles on Azeroth, was among the first. He has safeguarded the wilderness since its very birth. Goldrin, the first wolf, is the father to all derivatives to his kind. He wandered the ancient forests of Azeroth when the oldest of trees were still sprouting from the grounds. Aviana, goddess of the skies, is the mother to all winged creatures on Azeroth. She protected the skies and was considered to be as vicious as she is loving. Her feathers are white and as bright as pure light. There was also Malorn, who is thought to be the oldest, wisest, and most powerful of the ancients. He is a great white stag, gigantic in size, and thought to be capable of shifting into the shape and size of other animals, which is likely the reasoning for his mysterious qualities. Very little is known of Malorn, but he was considered to be the heart of the land itself, the true protector of the forests with wisdom beyond the comprehension of a mortal. He is telepathic, which further contributes to his characteristics of being one with the land. These ancients were referred to as demigods. They represent gods that live among the mortal plane. They are its watchful protectors, yet do not tolerate those that would harm nature or its inhabitants. Over the course of a couple millennia, the first mortals would be born. The order of their evolution is unknown, but at this time we can safely assume that the Trolls and Tauren were the first races to walk on Azeroth, which is likely given that they have more animalistic appearances. The Trolls were a violent race that waged wars against one another from the very beginning. As they were hostile, they became segregated into regions. Legend tells of a great war that took place between the two greatest tribes, and the loser was banished from the lands. The losers were left to wander and seek a new home. It's during that time that they encountered a being of great power, Elune. She may have pitied them for their misfortune, but she also shared her love to all who would have it. So she offered them a deal. If they promised that they would love her, and love one another so that they may learn to live as a peaceful race, in return she would gift them with a greater intelligence. She would bestow upon them the knowledge of magic, and she would also reshape their appearances to resemble her own, so that she may smile upon their beauty as she watches over them from the heavens. The Trolls agreed to her, for they had absolutely nothing to lose. Elune transformed their race into beautiful beings that had a great affinity for love and empathy. They would name themselves the Keldori, which meant children of the stars, as that is what their great mother would be to them. She was so bright, so loving, and cared for them when nobody else would. When Elune departed them, she vanished into the heavens. The Keldori thought that she would become one with the moon, and that they would forever venerate her, as she was both their mother and their guardian. The Tauren were very peaceful beings, as they would be considered animals despite their intelligence. They were a nomadic people that lived in harmony with one another in their tribal lands, much unlike the Trolls. They modeled the first Australopithecines, as their civilizations were based on the basic hunter-gatherer concepts. Yet the Tauren had many warriors to protect their people from vicious trolls and other dangers that they may have encountered. In their hunting activities, they came across the demigod Malorn. The Tauren described him as being the greatest animal they had ever seen, impossible to catch, and with a radiant white coat so brilliant it reflected the light of the moon so well that it could blind them. They were fascinated by Malorn and pursued him whenever they met him. Malorn was likely playing games with the Tauren, as he would have no reason to ever fear the mortals. Perhaps he was trying to guide them into the depths of nature, so that they would learn to use its powers to help the world. Malorn may have even been trying to get aid from the Tauren by leading them to a disturbance. Very little is known of that time, but we do know that Malorn needed help in some way. He was quite possibly the most powerful being on the planet save the Aspects, so to whom would he go to for aid? Malorn sought a communion with Elune, the mysterious goddess that had been helping life to flourish on Azeroth since the beginning. He asked her for her help, for he was troubled in some way. He may have perhaps been foreseeing the future in which he saw his lands torn apart and needed to prepare to defend against the coming violence, but we may never know. Regardless, Elune agreed to help him. She could see that Malorn was an anomaly of nature, like the other ancients, and told him that in exchange for her help, he would have to give her a child. Malorn agreed to her requisite, and the two of them gave birth to a son, Cenarius. He was born of his mother in the heavens. Shortly after his birth, Elune realized that he would not be able to stay there, for his father was a demigod. Cenarius still maintained a portion of mortality, so she sent him to Azeroth so he may live with his father in the peaceful forests of the planet. Cenarius is my all-time favorite character because he resembles a couple characters in Greek mythology, yet he isn't very much like any particular one. His closest resemblance would be Hercules, as he is a god stripped of his immortality, sent to live among men, yet also different. Elune is a goddess. She is eternal. She has no beginning and no end. She was born with the universe. Malorn is a demigod. He has many godlike characteristics, yet he is not immortal. He is half god, half mortal. That would make Cenarius 3/4 god, 1/4 mortal. After Elune sent him to live with his father, Malorn either had duties to attend to, or he had no interest in raising his son, and thus did not play an integral role in his parenting. Cenarius was left to fend for his own in his very early life, but that was not a problem. He was mostly a celestial being, so he had little to be concerned with in terms of what he may encounter in the young world of Azeroth. Regardless, Ysera, aspect of the dream, was aware of Cenarius' descending into Azeroth, and either out of an inherently motherly instinct or out of a desire to acquire an apprentice, she cared for him. She would act as his adoptive mother, raising him while his father protected the forests. Because of Cenarius' inheritance from his father, he was highly attuned with the forces of nature and the forests of Azeroth. Ysera taught him to experience the Emerald Dream. Within, Cenarius would learn the origin of nature, as well as the different dimensions present on Azeroth. Cenarius was the first being to enter the Emerald Dream after its original creation from Aenar's blessing. He would become the dream's warden, while Ysera would be its overseer. Through the dream, Cenarius would learn to manipulate nature and bend it to his will. He could harness the various forces in Azeroth, including the 4 elements. As he grew, he resembled both of his parents. His upper body would resemble the torso and facial appearances of his mother, while his lower body would be that of his father's. He bore 4 hooves in the form of a stag, as well as a left arm that represented the embodiment of nature in the form of a branch, displaying how he himself was even more a part of nature than his father. Cenarius would grow into Azeroth's greatest son, and he would succeed his father as the heart of the land. The other ancients recognized his heavenliness and respected him as their leader, son of Elune and Malorn. Like his father, Cenarius would meld within the forests and rarely make an appearance, for he shifted throughout its eminence, coexisting in the physical world and the Emerald Dream simultaneously. Over time, the mortal races would learn of their ancients, but to see one of them would be so rare that their existence became mythological, thought to be mere imaginations or otherwise animals of great size. Their misinterpretations, however, would later remind them to have faith in the supernatural, for the ancients would protect them in their hour of most dire need. The Keldori, the race thought to be adapted from the barbaric trolls by the goddess Elune, became the most prominent tribe in Kalimdor, which at the time was a single massive continent, for they were the most intelligent among the mortal races. Elun's blessing led them to discover a source of untold magic at the very center of the continent. The Kaldori ventured there as they could sense a mysterious power emanating from great distances. When they discovered the source, an enormous pool of mysterious energies lay before them. The Kaldori had no understanding of this pool, yet the forces emitted from it soaked into their being, making them stronger and enhancing their senses, their development, and ultimately, their evolution. They named the pool the Well of Eternity. It was a fountain of endless power that strengthened their people and made them desire the knowledge to understand its origin. Over centuries, the Kaldori built civilizations around the well, in the very center of Kalimdor. Their villages grew into towns, and eventually into one great city with the Well of Eternity at its core. The Kaldori developed into a people of great complexity. Their civilization had become massive. The dragon aspects oversaw the development of the Kaldori with great detail, but they did not interfere. Malygos in particular was concerned with the mortal races building their cities around a fount that fumigated raw arcane power, for it was his responsibility to safeguard the use of magic to ensure that no harm would befall Azeroth on its behalf. It is likely that the aspects met in council concerning the matter and determined that the development of life on Azeroth was best to run its natural course, for they knew best of all how much interference had already been committed upon the planet. They remained abstinent and continued to watch from above as the mortal races grew. Meanwhile, from below, unimaginable things were happening. The Pantheon's greatest enemies, the old parasitic gods from millennia ago, began stirring in the depths of their ancient prisons. It would seem that the Titans did not account for their incredible powers and telepathy, as they began to terrorize those that lurked above. The gods had lost their freedom to the might of the Pantheon, and now their only directive in life was to get it back. Their strategy for doing so was to break down the perfect world that the Titans had left behind, by cracking its very foundation from the most basic creatures all the way to the Titans themselves. They spoke in horrifying tones, only explicable within the mind. Language was not an issue for the old gods. They dominated the thoughts of their subjects, and were able to subconsciously direct the actions of unsuspecting beings. Tauren legends tell of a time when the first acts of violence were committed by their people. While hunting parties were venturing far from home, some would return with very grim stories. The Tauren were peaceful by nature, and did not know violence. On some of their expeditions, one or more hunters would turn against their brethren and ruthlessly kill them without cause. In some cases, the others were so horrified and stunned by the morbid actions of their brothers, they did not retaliate. When the party returned back to their village, and the murder was tried for their actions, they were asked why in all the good earth would they commit such a monstrous act of evil. They would respond that dark voices compelled them to do it. The old gods spoke to the mortals and told them to do terrible things.
Kill them all before they kill you. They have turned against you. Now take your revenge.
They corrupted the races which would most likely have been peaceful by nature. It is likely that the trolls originated over the presence of one of the old gods, which is why they are so violent. The ancient enemies of the Pantheon terrorized the mortal races, but their true targets were the powers that the Titans had left behind, the only thing standing in their way from regaining control of the planet once again, the dragon aspects. It was during this time that the old gods began speaking to the aspects. We can safely determine that compared to the symbiotes, the dragon aspects are no threat individually. They began collectively attacking the minds of the aspects. It is unlikely that the aspects were or even are aware who is instigating the corruption in their thoughts, because the old gods are unimaginably crafty and manipulative. Their first target was Neltharion, the Earth Warder. It's likely they chose to breach his mind first because he was the lord of the core, deep home, which is part of what contained them deep within the surface. They began projecting maddening images into his mind and whispering chaotic thoughts. Over hundreds of years, Neltharion was exposed to this torment, and he began to gradually slip away into madness. He did not know the source. He probably suspected the infiltration was not foreign, and that these maddening thoughts were in fact his own constructs, so he would be entirely oblivious to the notion he was being attacked to begin with. Neltharion kept these thoughts to himself, for they commanded him to do so. They were whispering of a plot that would cause him to betray the other aspects. Neltharion was the first to fall to their corruption.
You are upon a forces unseen. Tell yourself again that these are not truly your friends. There is no escape, not in this life, not in the next.
The old gods also attacked Nosdormu, but this aspect is much different. Remember that Nosdormu exists in the absence of a timeline, meaning he is present in every second from his time as the aspect all the way to his death. So the time in which the old gods began manipulating his thoughts is irrelevant. Originally, it could have happened millennia after they conquered Neltharion, or it could have happened beforehand. The distinctions do not vary the outcome. When the old gods compromised Nosdormu's sanity, they compromised his hold over the fabric of time on Azeroth, and thus could manipulate past events altering the future, thereby allowing them to orchestrate the events that have taken place in their favor. The short explanation is, it has happened, which means in reference to any time on Azeroth, Nosdormu has been corrupted. He is possibly the most vital aspect that holds Azeroth together, for he has the ability to change things that have already come to pass. Back on Kalimdor, the Kaldori were quickly becoming an advanced race. They were quite civilized, and like all young civilizations, they had a social hierarchy. Theirs was similar to India's past, in which they implemented a caste system by which a citizen's rank in society was determined by their tone of skin. Those with the lightest skin were named the Highborn. They lived in the oldest, most developed areas of the cities, surrounding the Well of Eternity. They bred almost exclusively amongst themselves, so over time they developed a different gene pool in which they were noticeably smaller, yet more attuned to the use of the arcane. Born among them was a true gem of mortals, Ashara. She was unbelievably charismatic, with talent 50 times that of the average Kaldori, but most of all, Ashara was the most beautiful being Azeroth would ever witness. Most males would be dumbfounded by her appearance. She would make Helen of Troy look like an ogre, and was capable of using her beauty to accomplish her most testing desires. The Kaldori would make her their queen, and build her palace encompassing the Well of Eternity. The great city they had constructed over the centuries would be named Zin-Ashari, which meant the glory of Ashara. In addition to her exquisite visage, she would also win her people's favor through stalwart leadership, males and females alike. On the outskirts of their civilization, in a city called Suramar, more outstanding individuals would be born. 3 among them would become essential to the world of Azeroth for millennia to come. A pair of twins by the name of Illidan and Malfurion were born under a very unique set of circumstances. We know nothing of their parents, but they are undoubtedly the most talented Kaldori to ever walk the face of the earth. They were born with a spiritual bond that ties their life forces together. It would grant them a supernatural relationship in which they are able to feel each other's presence from great distances, and to an extent understand one another's thoughts. Very little is known about their bond, but we can say with a discrete level of certainty that the death of one twin does not mean the end of another. Malfurion was born as the model of a fortunate Kaldori male. He was strong, with a moderate purple tone of skin, broad features, and a light green hair indicative of being closely tied to the forces of nature. Although Malfurion was a sight to behold, Illidan's appearance would shadow that of his brothers. Illidan bore similar features to that of his brother, yet his hair was dark and he had an even more athletic build. His most striking semblance was his bright, brilliant amber eyes. Very few individuals in the history of the Kaldori were born with amber eyes, and all of them were great. It was an omen among their people, and it meant that there were outstanding things to come for that individual. From his birth, society had expected Illidan Stonerage to fulfill his foretold legacy and help to lead their people to great salvation. Also born around the same time was a female by the name of Tyrande Whisperwind. She would be among the absolute most beautiful females in the history of their people. Born with a light, soft skin, exquisite blue hair, and luminescent silver eyes, which were cherished due to their resemblance to the goddess Elune. The three of them grew up together as small children in Suramar. They became three inseparable friends that grew into role model elves among their people. When the time came for them to choose their calling in life, all three chose separate paths. Tyrande chose to devote herself to the temple of Elune in Suramar and serve as one of the young priestesses there, worshipping the goddess and channeling her power into spells that would bring metaphysical healing to the Kaldori. Malfurion and Illidan would pursue the arts of arcane magic, as many among their age group would. Both of the twins were very talented, but Illidan seemed to have a much greater affinity for the conjuring of spells and incantations. Illidan was far more aggressive by nature than his brother, and sought the knowledge of said learnings to acquire a greater power and purpose in life. Malfurion determined that arcane magic was not his calling, and convened with his two counterparts to seek out and shed truth upon a myth that had been spoken among their tribes for generations. He sought to find the ancient and revered demigod Cenarius, son of Elune, and ask him for counsel and teaching if he would be so willing. Illidan and Tyrande agreed, and the three of them wandered the ancient forest lands to find Cenarius. Eventually they found him, or more appropriately, Cenarius revealed himself to them. They were in awe of the demigod. As Kaldori were very large in stature, Cenarius dwarfed their humbled appearances, towering over them at least 14 feet in height. He possessed a calming aura about him. Wildlife seemed to always surround Cenarius, as animals and plant life flourished and assembled wherever he made himself present. Illuminance followed him as well, like a soft white glow wherever he moved. To Cenarius, Malfurion expressed their veneration to him on behalf of the three, and humbly asked for his guidance as a mentor. Cenarius agreed to teach the three of them in his endless understanding of the natural world and godly aptitude. He had an inherent propensity for instructing, unlike any other being on the planet, for he was the son of Elune, the deity of their people. Cenarius introduced Malfurion, Tyrande, and Illidan to the fundamentals of nature and what comprises its various powers in the world of Azeroth. He also instructed them on how to draw from the extraterrestrial powers of nature, meaning the incredible power of the stars, moon, sun, and other cosmic bodies, all of which he knew, for he was born in the heavens. The three of them met with Cenarius frequently, as they continued their lives in Suramar, but Tyrande and Illidan had already chosen their paths of focus. Both of them respectfully withdrew from Cenarius' teachings, although they were grateful to him for his efforts. Malfurion, however, knew that from that moment on, his place was in the protecting of the world, and he would make it his duty to protect it from all harm. Through Cenarius, he would become perhaps its greatest protector, against all the fortunes stacked against him. This may very well be the reason that Elune asked for Malorn's child, thousands of years ago, to lead her cherished children to peace. Cenarius had offered to educate Malfurion in the ways of nature, as he admired his curiosity and saw great potential in the Caldori. Malfurion humbly accepted the demigod's offer, and very passionately followed his teachings. Together, Cenarius and Malfurion adapted the celestial powers of the demigod into a doctrine known as Druidism, the peaceful study of the various powers of nature. Nature encompassing the entirety of the cosmos. Malfurion would come to call Cenarius his Shando, which meant teacher in their native tongue. As time passed, the Caldori civilization grew to very large and complex proportions. They had grown to exalt their queen Ishara so ardently that she had almost become a deity to her people, and to deny her right of leadership was considered heresy among them. Ishara grew arrogant of her status, and with her control over the city named after her, she had also gained control of the ancient Well of Eternity within. Ishara was a very, very talented arcanist, the greatest among all mortals, and she, more than anyone, understood the Well's overwhelming power. She delved into the vastness of its magic, and allowed it to soak every ember of her soul. Through the Well, she became very powerful and very insightful. She developed the ability to extend her conscience to the depths of space, far out beyond the reaches of their known world. We may never know exactly what Ishara accomplished during this time, but one thing is for certain. In her exploits, she was discovered by an ancient, terrible force. She was met by likely the greatest force in all of the universe. She was hailed by the Dark Titan himself, Sargeras. Through the Well of Eternity, he spoke to her from within the twisting nether. He introduced himself as a god who sought her cooperation. Ishara, given her untold understanding of magic, most certainly understood the grating in their relationship, and bowed her submittance to him, her, the exalted queen of the Caldori and greatest mortal on Azeroth. She became infatuated with the very thought of Sargeras. She knew of his power and was completely fascinated by its essence. She desired him. She knew that for all of her prominence and her irrefutable beauty, that her mate must come from outside their world. Such a power would be the only one suitable for her demands. She wanted Sargeras to be her lover, for by manipulating him, she could become among the most authoritative figures in the universe. She kept these thoughts to herself, although they were undoubtedly exposed to Sargeras, with or without her knowing. He demanded that she create an interdimensional portal to her world using the Well of Eternity, so that he may arrive there and their union be made possible. Only through the Well of Eternity would such a portal be possible, for it had to possess the fortitude to withstand the might of a Titan traveling through it amidst the nether. Ishara readily agreed to Sargeras' demands, and ordered the most skilled highborn arcanist to carry out this task. The one who would oversee this project would be her most trusted and most powerful advisor, Lord Xavius. Xavius and his highborn would begin the spells necessary to perform this task, positioning themselves around the circumference of the well. They lacked the knowledge to create such a portal, so Sargeras would instruct Ishara on how to do so, while she interpreted it to the highborn. The incantations were of a dark origin, and they embraced the nature of shadow from the twisting nether to perform. To Azeroth, this magic was alien. Sargeras' motives for doing this are undeniably related to the interest of the Pantheon and the old gods as well. This is yet again a mystery to us. However, as Sargeras made his move, so did the gods of old. The Pantheon may have been unaware of these developments because they had left the dragon aspects to oversee the planet in their stead, but the aspects had been compromised of their duties. Nosdormu was seized at one point in the timeline. Because of this, the old gods possessed a certain degree of control over Azeroth. The events that will soon unfold are one such occurrence. As Nosdormu fights to maintain control of his own mind against the old gods, he is losing the battle. The old gods are breaking down his defenses, and by doing so, they are able to modify the past. Interestingly enough, the old gods want Sargeras to enter Azeroth, most likely because they know that if he were to set foot on the planet, the Pantheon would be forced to intervene. Were that to happen, a battle of that magnitude would undoubtedly rupture the planet itself, liberating the old gods so that they may take their revenge. This goes without saying that all life on Azeroth would be annihilated if these events should transpire, and thus must be prevented at all costs by the bronze aspect of time. The old gods are trying, and by that I mean in the current timeline, to modify this particular event in Azeroth's history approximately 10,000 years ago, where Sargeras was instructing Azshara to conjure a portal from the Nether. They are succeeding in doing so, and as such, Nosdormu has made the move to involuntarily commit 3 heroes to counteracting their efforts in this ancient time. Through a portal of time, he sent the leader of the Kirin Tor, and likely the most powerful mage of our time, Ronan, as well as Alexstrasza's first consort, Krasis, and lastly, Broxigar Sourfang, brother to the legendary Varrock Sourfang. Each of these individuals are legendary heroes of their time, which is clearly the reason that Nosdormu selected the 3 of them to aid in the resistance against the old gods. It was at this time that the 3 listed characters were tossed into ancient Kalimdor to relive the events of past heroes. Ronan was Krasis' apprentice, as Krasis had taken a great interest in the Kirin Tor and had been visiting them in their city of Dalaran. When they had been sent through the rift, Krasis made a point of reuniting with his human pupil as soon as he could. When they found one another, the 2 of them began to unravel the mysterious development that had befallen them, and were able to trace the cause back to Nosdormu's mental captivity, and that they must have been sent there for a reason. Broxigar knew little of arcane magic or the existence of the dragon aspects, so he was totally lost and confused in the forests of Kalimdor. He was eventually found by the Keldori sentinels in their forests just outside the city of Suramar, and captured as a prisoner. Given that he, Krasis, and Ronan had all come from the future, they were completely dumbstruck by the orc, and hadn't the slightest clue where he may have come from. The elves captured him and kept him in a cage where he would be displayed to the city so the townsfolk may observe the alien they found. He was greeted with complete hostility and downgraded by the Keldori, for they did not take kindly to outsiders, given their vicious heritage. Shortly after Brox's arrival, he was met by Tyrande and Illidan, where they were most intrigued by his appearance. When some of the townspeople began acting violently towards Brox, he lashed out in anger at them. His response was not met kindly, especially by Illidan's Stormrage. Illidan had become a powerful sorcerer at the time, and conjured a powerful fire spell that he used to char Broxigar's arm as punishment for his aggression. Brox was burned badly by the attack, and Tyrande abruptly scolded him for doing so. She, who had become a very adept healer, using the powers of a loon, mended Brox's wounds and gave him food and water. They conversed, and Tyrande grew very empathetic of the orc. She had no idea where he had come from, but she wanted to help him. Brox grew very fond of Tyrande. Even to him, she was beautiful, and exceedingly kind. He called her Shaman, for it was the only title he could think to give her to account for her healing powers. His kind only knew healing through the 4 elements, not from a loon. That night, Malfurion returned to Suramar after his teachings from Cenarius, and met with Tyrande and his brother. Tyrande expressed that she intended to free Broxigar from his cage and release him, for she did not believe he was dangerous or evil. It is important to convey that at this time the 3 of them had grown into adults, and both Malfurion and Illidan had very powerful romantic emotions for Tyrande. Because of their bond, the brothers knew that the other cared for her, and Illidan saw this fact as a contest, as Tyrande were to be one among them. Malfurion was far more focused on his developments as a druid, and did not even notice that Illidan felt this way. Neither of them agreed with Tyrande's plans to free the orc, but they were also not going to allow harm to befall her. So they had no choice but to accompany her in her plot. Back in the capital city of Zinashari, progress was being made in the summoning at the Well of Eternity. The Highborn were fulfilling their task faster than Sargeras had anticipated, and he was very pleased with their progress. The portal was now strong enough to begin ushering in members of his Burning Legion into Azeroth. Sargeras informed Ashara to prepare for the arrival of one of his most trusted lieutenants. She became overwhelmed with excitement, and personally prepared to meet Sargeras' servant. The first member of the Legion to step through the portal and set foot on Azeroth's soil for the very first time was Hakar, the Houndmaster of the Legion. He was the Lord of the Fellhounds, a vile, demonic breed of monster that consumed the magic that resides within living beings. They are devastating harbingers of death, and also the frontline infantry of the Burning Legion. As Hakar entered Azeroth, he turned to face Xavius, Ashara's counselor, and he said, "I am Hakar, and you are nothing." His purpose was to aid Xavius and the other Highborn in strengthening the portal for Sargeras to enter. As he did so, Hakar summoned hundreds of his Fellhounds into Azeroth and sent them into the world without informing the Kaldori of their coming or their purpose. The hounds made their way into the outskirts of the city and into the wilderness. That night, as Tyrande, Malfurion, and Illidan were plotting to break Broxigar free of his prison, the hounds began to attack the Kaldori that were of lower caste in the outskirts of their civilization. The Kaldori were not defenseless, however. They had a defense grid in place to protect the city of Zinashari, and at the core of that defense was the noble Moon Guard. They were a group of skilled sorcerers that drew arcane power from the Well of Eternity to destroy their foes. When they first encountered the Fellhounds, devastation struck their ranks. The Fellhounds excelled at counterspelling. They used tentacles attached to their bodies to literally suck the magic out of those who were highly attuned, and their lives along with it. When their numbers began to fall, Illidan was called to duty to defend the city from the demonic beasts. He was an amateur, but was inherently so talented and skilled at his craft that he quickly ascended in the ranks, and made his name known to enemies and allies alike. Tyrande was commissioned to join the priestesses of the moon on the front lines to heal soldiers that would become wounded in combat against the demons. She, too, would become a stalwart servant of Elune, with healing powers far greater than any elf of her time. Malfurion would witness the violence inflicted upon his people by the Fellhounds, and he would grieve for their losses. As he was separated from Illidan shortly after the invasion, Tyrande approached him and made him promise that he would look after Broxigar as she pursued her duties to the temple. It was during these times when the first signs of romance began to sprout between the two. Their separation was emotional, and Malfurion made a vow that he would protect Brox from harm until they would be reunited again. He then sought the counsel of his Shondo to see what he could do to end the impending demonic invasion. When he united with Cenarius, the two examined the situation through the omniscience of the Emerald Dream, and learned that the cause of this struggle was because of the Highborn summoning the Burning Legion into their world. Malfurion was the first to learn of Queen Ashara's deceit and betrayal, and he knew that no one would believe his discovery until her treachery was revealed in plain sight. It wasn't long after their evaluations that Cenarius sensed danger was near. Several hounds were approaching them. As time grew short, the demigod instructed Malfurion how to prepare for the coming foes. Like his kin, he was taught to rely on the use of offensive magic to defeat his enemies, and Cenarius warned that that methodology would cause his loss. He was to call upon the power of nature, for he had become a vessel for which it could express itself through. He had to ask nature for its cooperation and bend its power to his will. Cenarius also told Broxigar to prepare for battle, as the hounds would spare no one when they were discovered. Yet Brox had no weapon, and without one he would be very vulnerable to the demons. This series of events paved the way for the creation of one of the world's most powerful weapons. At the instructions of his Shondo, Malfurion opened a neural link with the orc, and drew from his thoughts the memories of his trusted axe he used to slay his enemies for generations. As Malfurion extracted Brox's thoughts, he held a branch that he was able to reshape into a wooden version of Brox's weapon. It became a replica of his lost axe. The Forest Lord then enchanted the weapon with a spell of his own, which imbued it with untold resilience and force. It was as light as a tree branch, yet many times more devastating than the strongest of steel, capable of slicing through flesh like warm butter. The hounds arrived and attacked the trio. They were slaughtered at the hands of Malfurion, Broxigar, and Cenarius. They called upon the fire from the stars and the roots from deep within the earth to entangle and burn the demons. Broxigar was absolutely devastating in combat, as he cleaved multitudes of demons effortlessly. It was then that they knew the worst of this demonic invasion had yet come to pass, and if Azeroth were to survive in the coming hours, they would have to prepare for a war of epic proportions, in which the powers of the world would have to unite in order to prevail. Cenarius departed from Malfurion and Brox, and told them that he must meet with the other ancients. When the time was right, he and the others would join with the mortal races to face the demon hordes in a great battle that would decide the fate of Azeroth. The war would later become known as the War of the Ancients, the forces of Azeroth versus the might of Sargeras's burning legion.